Hey everybody, welcome back to Church Public. This is a news show. We're going to talk about some of the things that are going on in the news and see what's going on. So, Trump was impeached again. Trump was acquitted again. There is just a lot that go with that, and we're going to look at that today. We are going to see what that means. He's the first president in history, the history of America, to be impeached twice. He is the first president in history to also be acquitted from impeachment twice. So, you got that going for you, which is nice. Welcome to Church Public. Here we go. All right, welcome back to Church Public. Again, there's so much going on. I told you I needed to do a news report, and there's a lot of news, but this is the one that I could fit in today. We're talking about impeachment. But before we get to the impeachment, I think it's important for us to understand why there was an impeachment in this second case again, because it's important not only for the president, for the country, it's important for you and me. It's important for you and me because we are constantly in pursuit of the truth. We're constantly in pursuit of what is real, what is not real, what we have to figure out as far as what's real news, what's reported, and what's happened. So you may have heard, that there were 5 people killed in this vicious Capitol Hill attack. Now, I said the day it happened that the riot on Capitol Hill was terrible. It should never have happened. It should have been stopped immediately. It was allowed to go further than it should have, and there are people that need to account for that, for sure. The whole impeachment is based on this idea that Trump incited the riot, sent people over. I'm not going to get into all of the details of that, but I'll suffice to say that he was giving a rally down the street. He said several times that people should peacefully protest. There have been many other politicians, celebrities who have called for much more vicious and violent things. So if just calling for something is incitement, then basically everybody's guilty. One of the words that kept coming up in the trial was fight. He said for people to fight, but literally every politician ever, even into like when you're going for high school ASB or class president or something, you're going to fight for the school. Every politician ever has said that. So that's just not a good bar for what is incitement. It just isn't. Legally, politically, whatever. So, and then there's a timeline issue of by the time he let the people out, it was at least an hour plus after people had already entered the Capitol. So the fact that he was directly connected to those events, it's a little bit fuzzy. Anyway, you can go and read up on all about that. What I wanted to talk about today was actually these 5 deaths that are associated with how brutal this Capitol riot was. And I think this is a small point, but it's also a big point because the death of someone at any time is tragic. That's absolutely true. But the how and why a death occurred is important. And in this particular instance, this whole Capitol riot, all of the resulting things that we'll talk about in a moment that are coming out of the Capitol riot, not just for the president, not just for Republicans and senators and legislators, but for you and me, there are effects of this that we're beginning to feel. And there are different legislations that are already being proposed in response to this that will affect you and I. And this is an important thing to consider. So I just wanted to run through real quickly the proposed or the alleged 5 deaths that were connected to this Capitol riot. And so I'll just read through a couple real quick, right? So number 1 and 2, there were 2 officers who committed suicide shortly after this riot. There is no information to date as to why they did this or why or how, in fact, it was connected to the riots. I think that's important. I think we need to know why those are connected. Number 3, 1 man suffered a heart attack. Number 4, another man suffered a stroke and died in hospital later. Number 5, a woman collapsed and was, quote, trampled to death, though again, to date, we don't have any medical examiner's report confirming that was actually the cause of her death. Now, actually, as the New York Times reported, there were 5 deaths. There were actually around 7 that were in some way connected, so there are 2 more. The one that has had the most press is, of course, Ashley Babbitt, and she was attempting to enter a restricted area of the Capitol, and she was shot by Capitol Police. That's about all of the story that we know so far as well. Again, it's very unfortunate, but this was a shooting from the Capitol Police to a civilian, not the other way around. And then finally, there's Officer Sicknick. Officer Sicknick, the initial reports were that he was hit with a fire extinguisher on his head, and that blunt force trauma is what caused his death. Again, every death is a tragedy, and especially death by unknown or extreme or malicious intent is a terrible thing, and we need to investigate that and we need to figure that out. But the initial report was that he was killed by a fire extinguisher. As the story continues to unfold, and even I believe the 8th of January, just a couple of days after, you have, let me look at it, it's the KHOU Houston reported that the initial cause of death was that he died of stroke, and there was no mention of fire extinguisher. There was no mention of any blunt force trauma at all. And then there are even reports that he was conscious after the event and that he actually texted some friends and said he was okay, though he had been pepper sprayed in the face. Terrible, but again, not leading to death. So CNN even reported on February 2 that medical examiners had found no evidence of blunt force trauma on his body. Why does this matter? Again, every death is a tragedy, and it is a tragedy that he died. Was he killed because of the riots? It's very unclear. It's very unclear, and the reason this is important is his death, especially the death of a police officer, is the hinge-pin of the whole impeachment trial, though it's now over, of course, that a police officer was killed in the line of duty by civilians who were trying to overthrow the government. And it appears that may not be the whole case. That may not be what actually happened here. And why does this matter? Again, this matters because even though Trump was acquitted for the second time, this is not a deadly disaster on Capitol Hill, as many of the news reports said early on, and continue to report that this was trying to upend the, I believe they called it the temple of democracy, and they had very strong words for all that was going on. And that's just not exactly what happened. And it wasn't a coup. Again, it was a terrible riot. It should not have happened. It should have been stopped immediately. Those responsible should have crimes that match the crimes that they did. They should have punishment rather that match the crimes that they did. And that's very true. But was it a coup? No, it wasn't a coup. If it was a coup, and what a coup is, where a group or groups of people go in and upend the people that are in charge, legislators, leaders, and install a new government. They were never even close to that. As you saw some of the pictures, the guy with the horns and the fur bear skin or whatever he was wearing, the weird Viking guy, he was in no danger of upending democracy or taking over America. I mean, let's be real about this, right? That just was never going to happen. And if you look at many of the pictures of the people involved, they just were not the people who were going to take over the country. They really looked more like they were bored and fired up. And sure, was there rhetoric that was incendiary, that people really wanted to do something and felt like their election was stolen? Yeah, I think that's true. Did they go too far? Yes, they went too far. Was it even near a coup? No, it wasn't near a coup. It was a riot. It was unfortunate. It should never have happened. It should have been stopped. But the effect now that we feel is the important thing, and the thing that we need to look out for, because truth matters, and there is still misinformation being posted by these mainstream news sources about, for instance, Officer Sicknick's death, the causes of it, and then what that leads to, the impeachment trial. But not only the impeachment trial, because it's not just about the president. It's not just about the Republican leaders that they're going after now. It's about you and it's about me, because they're beginning to do things that affect you and me. For instance, even just a small thing, the fence with the barbed wire that went around the Washington, D.C. and the Capitol and other buildings there is still up. It's the middle of February. What is the danger? Again, what expectation is there that someone is literally going to march in and take over the Capitol or the White House? That, as far as we know, according to any news reports, there is none. There is nothing different than any normal day of that happening, and yet the fences are still up. And more than that, you're hearing both news reporters and politicians from the Democratic side calling for very extreme measures against the people that were at the Capitol riot, against the people that were just protesting, not even involved in the riot itself, which was a small percentage of the people that were there that day, against any Republicans that supported Trump at all, against any Republicans kind of at all, against anyone who voted for Trump. Many people were talking about this. One person, a news reporter, even suggested that we needed to deprogram all of the people who voted for Trump. In other words, if you thought about this, if you are conservative, presumably the extension is if you're a Christian, if you have values that are not the values of the day, that are not the values of this administration's culture, then you are a target of this inquiry and this reprogramming and whatever other language they're beginning to turn on. And in fact, there is a bunch of other language turning on, because you may have heard that they're trying to instill another Patriot Act, the Patriot Act 2 or something like that. The first one was after 9/11, and they were allowed to spy on people in America, which hadn't happened before. Usually it was illegal to spy on Americans because they were Americans and had rights to privacy and speech and other things. But that allowed people in the government to spy on you with whatever cause they seemed to be appropriate at the time. So they're thinking about doing that again, to spy on, again, you based on what? I don't know. We don't know. Based on whether you attended, based on whether you were in Washington at all anytime around the inauguration, based on whether you voted for Trump, based on whether you're a Republican, based on whether you've posted conservative things on any of the social media platforms. I don't know. But that's not a great place to be as a society when the government is watching to see if you're going to post something that goes against the current administration. That's troubling. They are thinking about, I read this morning actually, that they're working on another 9/11-like commission, which basically does the same thing. After 9/11, there was a commission to look for terrorists and to find the people that were responsible and the people that supported the people that were responsible for the 9/11 bombings and plane crashes. And they're trying to form another commission to do something similar for this event. And again, the reason that exploring the cause of death for some of these people is important, it's important because if they died of natural causes, if they were stressed, if they committed suicide, that's not going in to intentionally murder people. That's something different. And that's important to note when all of a sudden the full weight of the government and all of the intelligence agencies are coming after normal Americans for their involvement in something that was bad, but not country ending, democracy ending bad. That's a problem. That's a big problem, and we need to watch out for that. And again, I feel like I'm talking conspiracy theory. That's not my intention. It's just these are real things that are happening, and we see real people being pulled off of social media for their comments. We saw Gina Carano, who was in a couple of Disney shows, removed not only from Twitter, but removed. Actually, she may not be removed from Twitter. I can check me on that. She was removed from Disney. She was removed from her agency that represented her as an actress because she said things that were unpopular to the culture. And there's a whole Bachelor thing that's unfolding right now as far as comments that a contestant made and then the host made, and both of them are off the show. And it doesn't matter who you are. You may be on the side of right that you think you're on, but if you say or do one wrong thing or don't apologize in the right way, there is no forgiveness. There is no moving forward. And this is important to know, because this is only a one-sided thing. There is no forgiveness on the side of the left. There's no forgiveness on the side of, if you call it the woke, you cannot escape it. You cannot apologize your way out of it. If you have made an unforgivable offense, you will not be forgiven. And on the other side, in the conservative side, especially in the Christian side, while we are accused of being dogmatic, judgmental, and unforgiving, the reality is we're very forgiving. We may call you out if you do something wrong, but we want you to be enfolded back in society. We want you to grow from your mistakes. We believe failure is actually an important part of life so that you can grow stronger and be better the next time, and that you don't lose out on an opportunity. I mean, our whole doctrine, the whole doctrine of Jesus is based on grace. The whole thing is based on grace. And Jesus tells story after story about grace. We'll talk about more of those a little bit later, but I just wanted to talk about that, both the impeachment and the unfortunate loss of life that happened, and how, whether it was really connected or whether it was maybe less connected than you're hearing on the mainstream news. And this is an important point. So in other news, I did want to give one more kind of connected piece that I think is both important and kind of interesting and a little bit funny. It's that, well, another representative was talking about the impeachment, and he was talking about the Republicans' involvement, and he had some interesting things to say about God, let's just say. So let's hear from him.
The choice was, well, do we chase those people, not knowing what they're going to say, to the courts for years, or do we go forward with a powerful, thundering case that we have, and also knowing that Mitch McConnell was already telling us that he believed the challenge was a jurisdictional one. So we could have called God herself, and the Republicans weren't going to be willing to convict. So
Did you catch that at the end? He's talking about the Republicans. He's talking about their involvement in the impeachment and things like that. And he says, we could have just talked to God herself and taken care of it. Sorry, there's just so many things to say about this. It's pretty amazing. But anyway, a couple things. First of all, in the new world that we're in of identity, I thought, again, I am no expert, but I did think that you weren't supposed to misgender people. And as far as I know, God has always identified as male from the beginning. He identifies as he, father, and even husband, and so by saying God herself, you're kind of breaking your own rules. But anyway, that's a silly point. Again, I don't know all the rules. They're impossible to keep up with. But I think the bigger point, of course, is that he's making a jab at Judeo-Christian values, that God is not a man, but God is a woman. And obviously this whole argument is silly. God is not a man or a woman. God is a God. But he has been called he for all of human history, essentially. And to just make that jump, again, is a jab at Christian values, and a jab at conservatism, and a jab at Christianity and Judaism at large. And it's silly, it's sad, and it's trying to lead this culture into another culture, I guess, with a God that's something else, something other than what God actually is. And it's unfortunate. It is kind of funny. I mean, and at least at some point we have to look at these things and figure out, like, what is real and what is not. And this also just falls into this idea that we have to continue to search for truth. Truth is an important thing, and we have to push for truth. So what can you do? Well, again, what you can do is continue to show grace. There's a great story that Jesus tells about a man who owes more than his life savings to the king, to the judge. And Jesus tells this story and says, that the judge is collecting his things and comes forward and says, hey, give me my money, essentially. And the guy's like, I could work my whole life and I'll never be able to pay you back. Please forgive me, because he's about to be thrown into jail. And in fact, it's even more serious than that. He's about to be thrown into prison. His whole family is about to be thrown into prison. And there's some cause as well in the story that some of them are even going to be sold as slaves to repay the debt. Like, this is a terrible, terrible story. And Jesus is telling this as an example. So what happens is the person in charge looks at this poor man and says, well, I'm going to have grace on you today. I'm not going to give you what you deserve. I'm going to give you what you don't deserve, and I'm going to forgive your whole debt. You don't owe this debt anymore. And he left and he rejoiced. And then he runs into a guy that owes him $10 or something, right? I'm making the numbers make more sense to us. There's obviously they use different kind of money, so you can read it and extrapolate. But he's like, hey, pay me my money, $100, say, whatever. And apparently he starts wringing this guy's neck, like grabs the guy and starts choking him, right? He's like, give me my money right now. And so they get pulled back in front of this ruler. And the ruler says, hey, You remember that time when I forgave this gigantic debt that you were never going to be able to repay? And my whole goal with you was showing you this mercy, showing you this grace that you would give that to the next person, because you've been given more than you even deserve, more than you could ever repay. And you can't even, let a guy off $100, or whatever. And the point here is, we who have been forgiven much, we who have been giving so much grace from God, covering over all the mistakes that we've made, need to be first in line to give that grace, to give that mercy, to give that forgiveness to those that do bad and wrong things to us. And this is a hard part of Christianity, because we as humans want justice, and we want to know that people are going to be punished for their crimes. And instead, sometimes we just have to sit back and say, oh, God, you're going to have to take care of this. I still contend that none of the politicians are going to save us. They're not the Savior. They're not the Messiah. They're never going to be. It doesn't matter who you elect. We should still vote for policies. We should still vote for the things that make life better and make society better. And we should vote against the things that make life worse. That's, again, common sense. It should have been common sense. It's become very hard because these personalities are involved, and people vote on personality more than the issues. But even now that we're past the election, we should and will continue to live out our values, to show people our values, to give people that grace, the mercy that they don't even deserve, and to show that love to this world, because that's the important thing. So the impeachment has happened again. The acquittal has happened again. And now we move into the next phase. I've talked about this, and I'll just keep talking about it. There are people who aren't going to like what you have to say. But there may also be people who appreciate that you care about them, that you appreciate that you can show them some grace, show them some mercy. And that's where the power of the gospel is really stronger than any of these wacky things that are happening in the culture. And we need to know the culture. I talked about that yesterday. We need to know the culture, and we need to know how to deal with the culture, how to work into the culture so that we're not irrelevant. It is important. But we also need to know what we believe, who we follow, how we are supposed to live. That's really the most important thing. So what do we do about this? We need to keep living for the truth. We need to keep seeking God, the real God. And we need to watch out for those that will deceive us. They are out there, and they want to deceive you. And until next time, I hope that you keep the faith. God bless. Have a good one.